I was sitting at the kitchen table in Robert Mitchell's house on a Tuesday evening in October, helping his daughter Maya work through derivatives and chain rule problems for her AP Calculus exam, when he said the words that should have made me run right out the door and never look back. You know, Claire, you're not just taking care of Maya's education anymore. You're taking care of both of us now. We've both come to depend on you in ways I don't think any of us anticipated when you first started coming here. The way he said it, with that smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, with his hand resting on the back of my chair just a little too close to my shoulder, his fingers almost but not quite touching my back, made something in my stomach twist uncomfortably. It was the kind of discomfort I'd been feeling more and more frequently around Robert Mitchell, but kept pushing down, kept rationalizing away, kept telling myself I was overreacting or reading too much into innocent comments and gestures. But I smiled back and nodded like this was a normal thing for an employer to say, because I was 23 years old, fresh out of college with a degree in mathematics and $47,000 in student loan debt, and this tutoring job paid more per hour than anything else I could find in a job market that was still recovering from the recession. I needed the money. I needed this job. So I swallowed my discomfort and said something like, "I'm happy to help however I can," and went back to explaining calculus concepts to Maya while her father stood behind my chair for just a few seconds too long before walking away. My name is Claire Robertson. I'm 25 years old now, and what I'm about to tell you is the story of how I went from being a simple math tutor to being trapped in a situation so manipulative and controlling that it took me almost 2 years to recognize it for what it was and another 6 months to escape. It started innocently enough, the way these things always do. I'd been working as a tutor through a local agency for about 4 months, driving around to different houses in the suburbs, helping high school students with algebra and geometry and calculus. The pay was decent, the hours were flexible, and I liked working one-on-one with students more than I'd liked the classroom environment during my student teaching semester. Most of my clients were pretty standard: parents who wanted their kids to get better grades, students who were struggling with specific concepts, families who were pleasant but professional. Then I got assigned to Maya Mitchell. The agency told me Maya was a 16-year-old junior at one of the best private schools in the city, daughter of a successful corporate lawyer, needed help with AP Calculus because she was struggling to maintain her A average. They told me Robert Mitchell was a widower, that Maya's mother had died 3 years ago from cancer, that the family was still adjusting but doing well overall. They told me Robert Mitchell was willing to pay $50 an hour for tutoring sessions 3 times a week, which was almost double what most of my other clients paid. I should have been excited. Instead, I felt uneasy from my very first visit to their house. The Mitchell house was in one of those neighborhoods where every lawn is perfect and every house looks like it belongs in a magazine. Big colonial-style home, circular driveway, expensive cars in the garage. Robert answered the door when I arrived for our first session, and my first thought was that he didn't look like a grieving widower. He was probably in his mid-40s, tall and fit, wearing business casual clothes that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe, with salt and pepper hair styled perfectly. He smiled when he opened the door, but it was the kind of smile that felt calculated, like he'd practiced it in a mirror. "Claire? Come in, come in. Maya's upstairs finishing some homework. Can I get you something to drink? Water, coffee, wine?" I politely declined the wine. It was 4 p.m. on a Tuesday, and also wildly inappropriate to offer to someone you just met who was there to tutor your teenage daughter, and asked for water. Robert led me through a house that was beautifully decorated but felt sterile somehow, like a showroom instead of a home where people actually lived. There were photos on the walls, family photos with a woman I assumed was Maya's late mother, but they felt staged rather than candid. Maya came downstairs a few minutes later. She was a pretty girl, blonde like her father, quiet and polite in that way that some teenagers are when they're naturally shy versus when they've been trained to be seen and not heard. She seemed relieved to see me, which I thought was odd since most students aren't exactly thrilled about tutoring. We set up at the kitchen table and started going through her calculus homework. Maya was actually pretty good at math. better than her father had implied when he'd called the agency. She understood the concepts, she just needed someone to work through practice problems with her and boost her confidence. We worked for about an hour, making good progress, and I was starting to think this would be a straightforward tutoring job.
Then Robert came into the kitchen. He didn't just pass through or get something from the refrigerator. He pulled out a chair and sat down at the table with us, watching Maya and me work through problems. At first I thought maybe he was just interested in his daughter's education, which would be normal enough. But the way he watched wasn't like a parent checking on homework. It was more intense, more evaluating, like he was studying me rather than the math we were doing. After about 15 minutes of this, Maya started to get noticeably tense. Her answers became more hesitant. She second-guessed herself more. She kept glancing at her father like she was waiting for him to criticize her. When we finished the session, Robert walked me to the door. "That went well, don't you think? Maya really responds to you. She needs a strong female influence in her life. Since her mother died, she's been struggling with more than just calculus, if you know what I mean." I nodded sympathetically, not really sure what to say. My wife used to handle all the emotional stuff, the girl talk, helping Maya navigate high school drama, all of that. I'm good at providing structure and discipline, but I'm not equipped to handle the softer side of parenting. That's why I'm so glad we found you. Something about the way he said that, like he'd found me rather than the agency assigning me, felt off. But I pushed the feeling aside and said something generic about being happy to help Maya succeed in calculus. Over the next few weeks, the tutoring sessions settled into a routine. I'd come to the house 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday afternoons. Maya and I would work at the kitchen table for an hour or sometimes 90 minutes. Robert would usually be home, working in his study or making business calls, but he'd always find a reason to come into the kitchen at some point during the session. Sometimes he'd offer me something to drink or eat. Sometimes he'd ask how Maya was progressing. Sometimes he'd just sit and watch for a few minutes before leaving. Maya was making good progress in calculus. Her test scores were improving. Her confidence was growing. She was starting to tackle harder problems without as much anxiety. But I started noticing other things that concerned me. Maya was painfully thin, the kind of thin where you could see bones and angles that shouldn't be quite so prominent. She picked at her food when Robert insisted on feeding me dinner after our session started running longer. She was always tired, dark circles under her eyes, sometimes struggling to focus because she'd been up late finishing other homework or projects. She was involved in what seemed like a million activities: student council, debate team, volleyball, volunteer work at a hospital, an internship at a law firm, all while taking 5 AP classes. When I gently asked her about her schedule, suggesting maybe she was taking on too much, she glanced toward the doorway where her father might overhear and said quietly, "Dad says if I want to get into an Ivy League school like he did, I need to be well-rounded and competitive. I can't just be good at school, I have to be exceptional at everything." That should have been my second warning sign. The first was Robert's behavior toward me, which was getting progressively more personal and inappropriate. He started asking me questions about my personal life. Did I have a boyfriend? Where did I grow up? What did my parents do? Why did I choose to be a tutor instead of teaching in a school? At first, these seemed like normal getting-to-know-you questions, the kind of small talk you might make with someone who's regularly in your home. But the questions got more probing. He'd ask about my finances, my student loans, my living situation. He'd comment on my appearance, saying things like, "You look tired today. Are you taking care of yourself?" Or, "That's a nice dress. You should wear things that flatter your figure more often." Comments that felt too familiar, too personal, crossing boundaries that should exist between a parent and their child's tutor. About 6 weeks into tutoring Maya, things started to shift in ways that were subtle enough that I couldn't quite point to any single moment and say, "This is wrong," but the accumulation of small incidents was creating a pattern I couldn't ignore. Robert started asking me to stay for dinner after our tutoring sessions. "Maya needs to eat, and you're here anyway, so you might as well join us. It'll be nice to have someone else at the table. It's too quiet with just the 2 of us." The first time he asked, I hesitated. Everything in my professional training, the brief section on boundaries in my education courses, the common sense I'd absorbed from years of babysitting and tutoring, said that having dinner with a client's family was crossing a line from professional to personal. But Maya was looking at me with this hopeful expression, and I realized this girl was probably lonely eating dinner with just her intense father every night. She needed normal human interaction, needed someone who wasn't constantly evaluating and critiquing her performance. So I agreed, telling myself it was just this once to be kind, just this once because Maya seemed so isolated. But once became twice, became a regular occurrence, and each time it became harder to say no because Robert would time the tutoring sessions so they'd end right around dinner time, then act like it was the most natural thing in the world for me to stay. He'd already ordered food from expensive restaurants, the kind of sushi and Thai and Italian that I couldn't normally afford on my tutoring income. We'd sit at the formal dining room table with actual china and cloth napkins, and it would feel simultaneously too casual and too formal, like I was playing a role in someone else's family dynamic without really understanding what my part was supposed to be. The conversations during these dinners followed a pattern I came to recognize. Robert would talk about his day at the law firm, name-dropping clients and judges and other lawyers, making it clear he moved in rarefied professional circles. He'd ask Maya about her day, but in a way that was really more of an interrogation, demanding to know exact scores on every quiz and test, critiquing her performance and activities, pushing her to do more and be better, and never quite measuring up to his expectations. Then he'd turn to me, and the tone would shift to something softer, more personal, almost intimate. "How was your day, Claire? You look tired. Are you taking care of yourself? That's a nice sweater. Blue is definitely your color. Have you thought about what I said about taking on more hours? Have you talked to your boyfriend lately? The one you mentioned a few weeks ago." The questions felt intrusive, but I didn't know how to deflect them without seeming rude or ungrateful. After all, this man was feeding me expensive food in his beautiful home, paying me well, trusting me with his daughter's education. The least I could do was answer some personal questions, right? That's what I told myself. He started complimenting me during these dinners in ways that felt calculated to make me feel special. Maya's so lucky to have someone as intelligent and articulate as you helping her. Most tutors are just kids marking time before graduate school, but you're different. You have real talent for teaching, real patience, real care for your students. You're so mature for your age, not like most 23-year-olds who are still figuring out who they are. You have this calm presence that just makes people feel comfortable. I wish I'd had someone like you in my life when I was struggling through law school. The compliments felt good. I'll be honest about that. I was young and still figuring out my identity and my career path, working multiple tutoring jobs to make ends meet, living in a cramped apartment with 2 roommates who were rarely home because they had more social lives than I did, eating ramen and pasta more nights than not because my budget was so tight. Being in this beautiful house, eating good food, being told I was intelligent and talented and special, being treated like my presence mattered, it was intoxicating in a way I didn't fully recognize at the time. I didn't understand that Robert was deliberately building me up to break down my defenses, making me feel valued so that I'd be more willing to overlook boundary violations later. Around week 8, Robert made his first major move to increase his control over me. He offered me a substantial raise and a change in our working arrangement. "Claire, I want to talk to you about something important. You're doing exceptional work with Maya, truly exceptional. Her confidence has grown, her grades have improved, she's developing study habits that will serve her well in college. But I know the tutoring agency you work through takes a significant cut of what I pay. What if we cut out the middleman? What if I hired you directly? I could pay you $75 an hour, which is substantially more than you're making now, and we could extend the sessions, maybe add a 4th day per week, maybe some weekend sessions when Maya has big exams coming up." The money was tempting, so tempting I could almost taste it. $75 an hour was more than I'd ever imagined making at 23. It would let me pay down my student loans faster, maybe save up for a car that didn't break down constantly, maybe afford to live alone instead of with roommates.
but something about the offer made me deeply uncomfortable in ways I couldn't quite articulate. Working directly for Robert instead of through the agency felt like it would change our dynamic in ways that I sensed would be bad for me but couldn't fully explain. The agency provided a buffer, a layer of professional distance, a structure that defined our relationship as business rather than personal. If I worked for Robert directly, that buffer would disappear. I'd be entirely dependent on his goodwill, his assessment of my performance, his decisions about my pay and hours and working conditions. I told him I needed to think about it, to consider the implications, to maybe talk to my parents or friends about whether it was a good idea.
His response was smooth, practiced, designed to push me toward the decision he wanted. Of course, no pressure at all. Take all the time you need to think it over. But Claire, I want you to know that this offer comes from a place of genuine respect and appreciation. I see how hard you work, how much you care, how talented you are. Most employers wouldn't recognize that or compensate you appropriately. I'm trying to make sure you're valued properly. Don't you think you deserve to be paid what you're worth? That last question was manipulation, pure and simple, though I didn't recognize it at the time. Of course I thought I deserved to be paid well. Of course I wanted to be valued. And Robert was framing his offer as recognition of my worth, as him being generous and fair, as him looking out for my interests. How could I say no without implying that I didn't think I deserved better pay? The following week, my 10-year-old Honda Civic broke down on the highway. The transmission was failing, the repair estimate was $1,400, and I absolutely did not have that kind of money sitting around. I'd been living paycheck to paycheck, putting every extra dollar toward my student loans, trying to be responsible about my debt. A $1,400 car repair might as well have been $14,000 for how impossible it seemed. I mentioned the car trouble to Maya during our tutoring session the next day, explaining why I'd arrived by bus instead of driving, making conversation while we worked through physics problems. I thought nothing of it, just casual chat about life's frustrations. But of course, Robert overheard. He had this way of always being nearby during our tutoring sessions, always aware of what was being discussed, always monitoring even when he appeared to be doing other things. He came into the kitchen where Maya and I were working, his expression concerned and sympathetic. Car trouble? That's terrible, Claire. I know how stressful that must be, especially on a tutoring salary. You know, I could lend you the money for the repair. We could work out a payment plan, or you could work it off through additional tutoring sessions. No interest, no pressure, just helping out someone who's become important to our family. You're here 5 days a week helping Maya. You're practically part of the family already. We take care of family. I should have said no. Every instinct I had that was still functioning properly was screaming at me to say no, to figure out literally any other solution, to borrow from my parents, or put it on a credit card, or take out a small personal loan from a bank, or sell my belongings, or ride the bus for a while longer. But Robert was standing there looking concerned and generous, Maya was looking worried about me, and I was 23 and broke and stressed about how I was going to get to my other tutoring jobs without a car. The bus system didn't reach all the neighborhoods where my clients lived. Without a car, I'd have to quit some of my jobs, which would mean less income, which would make everything even worse. So I said yes. I accepted Robert's offer of a loan, told myself I'd pay him back as quickly as possible, tried not to think about how this was shifting our relationship from professional to personal, from tutor and client's parent to debtor and creditor. That was my first major mistake, though I wouldn't understand just how catastrophic that mistake was until much later. Once I owed Robert money, the power dynamic shifted in ways that were subtle but unmistakable. He started making comments about the loan, never in a threatening way, always casual and friendly, but comments that reminded me constantly of my debt to him. I noticed you got your car fixed. That's good. Reliability is important. When do you think you'll be able to start paying back the loan? Oh, don't worry about it this month. If money's tight, we can adjust the payment schedule. I just want to make sure you're being responsible with your finances. You're still going out with friends on weekends? That's nice, but maybe you should consider cutting back on entertainment expenses until you've paid off your debts. Just some friendly advice.
The comments made me feel guilty and ashamed, like I was being irresponsible even though I was living incredibly frugally and putting every spare dollar toward paying him back. He'd also bring up the loan when discussing other aspects of our working relationship, connecting my debt to his other requests in ways that weren't quite explicit threats, but felt like threats anyway. I've been thinking about you taking on that direct employment position we discussed. It would make it easier for you to pay back the car loan with the higher hourly rate, and it would give us more flexibility to extend your hours, which Maya really needs as she prepares for AP exams. You want to help Maya succeed, don't you? And you want to pay off your debt as quickly as possible, right? This arrangement would solve both problems. So I left the tutoring agency and started working for Robert directly. I told myself it was a practical decision, a financial decision, the smart choice for paying off my debt and advancing my career.
But really, it was the point of no return. The moment I gave Robert full control over my employment and income, the moment I became entirely dependent on him with no institutional support or oversight. Robert immediately increased my hours and responsibilities. Instead of 3 days a week tutoring just calculus, I was coming 5 days a week for multiple subjects. Instead of 1-hour sessions, we were doing 2 or 3-hour sessions. He added new responsibilities that had nothing to do with tutoring. He wanted me to help Maya with college application essays, to review her extracurricular activities and suggest improvements, to drive her to some of her activities when Robert was busy with work, to help plan her schedule to maximize her competitiveness for Ivy League admissions. I tried to set boundaries, tried to say that some of these requests were beyond my scope as a tutor, that I had other clients who needed my time, that I couldn't be available quite as much as he was asking. His response was a masterclass in manipulation. "Claire, I thought you cared about Maya's future. She's at a critical point in her academic career. The next year will determine where she goes to college, which will shape the entire trajectory of her life. Don't you want to be part of that success? Don't you want to help her reach her full potential? And frankly, given what I'm paying you, I don't think it's unreasonable to expect a higher level of commitment and availability. Your other clients, do any of them pay you what I pay you? Wouldn't it make more sense to focus your energy where it's most valued and most needed?" He was right about the money. With the higher hourly rate and increased hours, I was making more from the Mitchell family than from all my other tutoring clients combined. The financial logic was undeniable. Why work 10 hours a week for 5 different families at $50 an hour when I could work 15 hours a week for one family at $75 an hour? The math was simple. But what I didn't understand yet was that Robert was systematically isolating me, cutting me off from other income sources and relationships so that I'd be completely dependent on him. By month 4 of working directly for Robert, the Mitchell family was my only client. I'd gradually phased out my other tutoring jobs because I simply didn't have time for them anymore, with how many hours Robert was demanding. I was at the Mitchell house 5 days a week, sometimes 6 if Robert decided Maya needed extra help before a major test. I was having dinner with them most nights because the sessions would run long, and Robert would insist it was silly for me to leave right at dinner time when there was plenty of food. The boundaries between professional tutor and family member were getting increasingly blurred in ways that made me uncomfortable, but that I couldn't figure out how to fix without seeming ungrateful or unprofessional. Robert started calling me when I wasn't at the house, just to chat, to ask my opinion on things related to Maya, to tell me about his day. He started texting me good morning and good night. He made comments about how much easier his life was with me helping out, how Maya was happier and healthier, how he didn't know what they'd do without me. Except Maya didn't actually seem happier or healthier. She was still painfully thin, still exhausted all the time, still overscheduled to the point of breaking. When I suggested to Robert that maybe Maya needed to drop an activity or two, that she seemed overwhelmed, he dismissed my concern. "Maya's fine. She's just learning what it takes to be successful. I was the same way at her age, pushing myself to excel. That's how you get ahead in life." But I started noticing other things that worried me more.
Maya flinched sometimes when her father raised his voice. She was obsessive about getting perfect grades, having panic attacks if she got anything less than an A on an assignment. She never contradicted her father, never expressed opinions that differed from his, never seemed to have any autonomy over her own decisions. One night after a tutoring session, I was packing up my things when Maya said quietly, "Claire, can I ask you something?" "Of course, anything." "Do you think my dad likes you?" The question caught me completely off guard. "I don't know. I mean, I think he appreciates the help I'm giving you with school. Why do you ask?" Maya looked down at her hands. "He talks about you a lot when you're not here, about how helpful you are, how mature you are, how it's nice to have another adult around. My mom died 3 years ago, and he hasn't dated anyone since. I think maybe he wishes you were here for him and not just for me." My stomach dropped. "Maya, I'm your tutor, that's all. I'm here to help you with school." She nodded but didn't look convinced. "I know, I just wanted to make sure you knew that my dad can be really intense about things he wants, and I think he wants you to be part of our family in a bigger way." I should have quit right then. That was the moment to set a firm boundary, to recognize that this situation was heading somewhere inappropriate and unhealthy. But I didn't. I told myself Maya was reading too much into her father's behavior, that I was overthinking things, that I needed this job. The following week, Robert sat me down for what he called a family meeting. Maya was there too, looking uncomfortable. "Claire," he started, "I want to talk to you about making this arrangement more permanent. You've become so important to both of us over these past months. Maya's grades are excellent, she's on track for Ivy League schools, and that's largely because of you. But more than that, you've brought warmth back into this house. It's felt like a home again, instead of just a place where Maya and I exist separately." I wasn't sure where this was going, but I was getting increasingly uncomfortable. "I'm glad I could help, but I'm not sure what you mean by more permanent." Robert smiled. "I want to offer you a live-in position. There's a guest suite over the garage that's basically a small apartment. You could move in, be here full-time for Maya. I'd pay you a salary, let's say $60,000 a year, plus room and board. You'd have your own space, but be available to help Maya whenever she needs it. Think of it as a combination tutor, mentor, and older sister figure. $60,000 a year plus free housing was more money than I'd ever imagined making at 23. It would let me pay off my student loans within a few years instead of decades. I'd have my own space, nicer than the apartment I was currently sharing with roommates. From a purely financial perspective, it was an incredible opportunity, but every instinct I had was screaming that this was wrong. Robert, I appreciate the offer, but I don't think that's appropriate. I'm Maya's tutor. Living here would blur too many boundaries." His expression hardened just slightly. "Boundaries? Claire, I think those boundaries are already pretty blurred. You're here 6 days a week. You have dinner with us almost every night. You're involved in every aspect of Maya's life, from her homework to her college applications to driving her to her activities. You're already functioning as part of this family. I'm just offering to formalize it and compensate you properly." He wasn't wrong about the boundaries already being blurred, which was part of what scared me. But before I could respond, Maya spoke up. "Dad, maybe Claire needs time to think about it. She doesn't have to decide right now." Robert turned to his daughter with an expression I'd never seen before. Cold, controlled, angry underneath. "Maya, this is an adult conversation. Claire and I are discussing what's best for your future. You don't need to involve yourself." Maya immediately went quiet, shrinking back in her chair, and I realized this was a pattern. Robert controlled every conversation, every decision, every aspect of life in this house, and he was trying to extend that control to me. "I need to think about this," I said, standing up and gathering my things. "This is a big decision, and I need time to consider it properly." Robert stood too, moving into my space in a way that felt subtly threatening, even though he didn't touch me. "Of course, take all the time you need. But Claire, I hope you understand how much we need you here, both of us. Maya especially. She's really attached to you. It would devastate her if you suddenly left." That was manipulation, and I knew it. He was using Maya, using my care for this girl I'd been working with for months, to pressure me into a decision I wasn't comfortable with. I left the house feeling shaken and confused. Over the next few days, Robert increased the pressure. He texted me multiple times a day, talking about how excited Maya was about me potentially moving in, how it would be so good for her to have consistent female presence, how this could be a fresh start for all of us. He sent me a video tour of the apartment over the garage, which was admittedly beautiful. He had his accountant draw up an employment contract with the salary and benefits clearly outlined. He was making it as easy as possible to say yes, and as difficult as possible to say no. Maya started in on me too, though I don't think she was doing it intentionally. She'd make comments about how lonely the house was, how much she wished I was around more, how nice it would be if I lived there and could help her with late-night homework, or just talk when she was stressed. I felt trapped. If I said no, I'd be letting down this teenage girl who clearly needed support and stability. If I said yes, I'd be entering into a situation that felt increasingly inappropriate and controlling. I tried to talk to my friends about it, but they all thought it sounded like an amazing opportunity. $60,000 plus free rent? Are you kidding? That's like a $75,000 or $80,000 job in real terms. You'd be crazy not to take it. My parents thought it sounded wonderful too. A nice family taking me in, treating me like one of their own, paying me well to help their daughter. No one seemed to see the red flags I was seeing, or maybe I wasn't explaining them clearly enough. After a week of pressure from every direction, I caved. I told Robert I'd take the position on a trial basis.
3 months, I said. If it's working well for everyone after 3 months, we can discuss making it permanent. Robert smiled that calculated smile that I'd learned meant he'd gotten what he wanted. Perfect. I knew you'd see how much sense this makes. You can move in this weekend. This weekend. Not giving me time to reconsider or back out, just pushing forward with momentum. I moved into the apartment over the garage on a Saturday in March. The space was beautiful, I had to admit. Small kitchen, living area, bedroom, bathroom, all newly renovated and decorated. Robert had even bought new furniture for it, saying he wanted me to feel at home. My friends helped me move my few belongings, joking about how I'd moved up in the world, going from a cramped apartment share to my own private space in a mansion. If only they knew how wrong this felt. The first week was okay. I had my own space to retreat to at night. I'd come down to the main house during the day to work with Maya, have dinner with them, then go back to my apartment. It felt manageable, professional enough. But by week 2, the boundaries started eroding rapidly. Robert would text me in the evenings asking if I wanted to join them for a movie. He'd knock on my apartment door in the mornings to see if I wanted coffee before starting the day. He'd find excuses to need my help with things that had nothing to do with tutoring Maya. Can you proofread this brief I'm writing? Can you help me pick out a birthday gift for my sister? Can you organize my home office? The requests got more personal. Can you help me go through my late wife's clothes? I think it's time to donate them, but I can't face doing it alone. That one I refused. Robert, that's really personal family business. I don't think it's appropriate for me to be involved in that. He looked hurt. Claire, you are family. That's the whole point of you being here. We're not keeping you at arm's length like you're just an employee. We're including you in our lives. But I didn't want to be included in these particular parts of his life. I wanted to tutor Maya, help her succeed academically, and maintain professional boundaries. That's not what Robert wanted at all. He started doing things that made my skin crawl. He'd stand too close when we were talking. He'd touch my shoulder or my back when he passed by me. He'd make comments about my appearance, what I was wearing, whether I looked tired or stressed. He'd ask about my dating life, if I was seeing anyone, why a smart, pretty girl like me was single. One night, about a month after I moved in, Robert knocked on my apartment door around 10 p.m. I answered in my pajamas, which were perfectly modest but still felt awkward. "Claire, I can't sleep. Do you have a few minutes to talk?"
I felt like I couldn't say no. He was my employer and my landlord, and I was living in his house. So I let him in, left the door open, and we sat in my small living area with me feeling deeply uncomfortable. Robert talked for over an hour about his loneliness since his wife died, about how hard it was to raise Maya alone, about how isolated he felt. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. "You remind me of my wife when she was young. She was smart and kind and good with Maya, too, back when Maya was little. I think that's why I feel so comfortable with you. You have some of her best qualities." "I don't remind you of your wife," I said firmly. "I'm a completely different person. I'm here to help Maya with school, that's all." Robert smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "Of course. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. I just wanted you to know how much we appreciate you, both of us." After he left, I locked my door and sat on my bed shaking. This was wrong. This whole situation was wrong. But I was trapped now. I'd quit my other tutoring jobs. I'd given up my apartment. All my possessions were here. I was financially dependent on Robert, living in his property, isolated from my support system because I was working such long hours that I barely saw my friends anymore. The next few months were a nightmare of boundary violations and increasing control. Robert wanted me to eat every meal with them. He wanted me to come on family outings, to the theater and museums and weekend trips. He started buying me gifts, clothes and jewelry and books, saying he wanted to make sure I had everything I needed. When I tried to refuse the gifts or return them, he'd look wounded and say he was just trying to take care of me. Why wouldn't I let him do that? He started criticizing my choices. The friends I saw on my rare days off weren't good influences. The way I spent my money was irresponsible. The guys I occasionally went on dates with weren't good enough for me. He had opinions about everything in my life and expected me to listen to those opinions and adjust my behavior accordingly. Meanwhile, Maya was deteriorating. She'd lost more weight, was barely sleeping, was having frequent anxiety attacks. I tried to talk to Robert about it, to suggest Maya needed professional help, maybe a therapist, maybe to reduce her activities and pressure. He dismissed every concern.
"Maya's fine. Stop coddling her. She needs to be pushed to reach her potential." But Maya wasn't fine. She told me in a rare private moment that she felt like she was drowning, like nothing she did was ever good enough for her father, like she had no control over her own life. She said she couldn't wait to go to college just a bit away from home, which broke my heart because no 17-year-old should feel that way about their family. I started researching Robert's behavior late at night in my apartment over his garage, sitting cross-legged on my bed with my laptop, reading articles about emotional abuse and control and manipulation, trying to understand what was happening to me. The patterns were all there, laid out in academic articles and survivor testimonies and psychological analyses. The isolation from friends and other support systems? Check. The financial control and creating economic dependence? Check. The boundary violations that escalate gradually over time? Check. The criticism disguised as concern or advice? Check. The gifts and favors that create obligation and debt? Check. The use of a third party, in this case Maya, to manipulate me emotionally and keep me compliant? Check. Robert wasn't just an intense employer or a lonely widower looking for companionship or a controlling parent who didn't know where to draw lines. He was deliberately, systematically, methodically working to control me the same way he controlled his daughter, using many of the same tactics abusers use to trap their victims. That realization hit me like cold water to the face. I wasn't in a difficult employment situation, I was in an abusive situation, and it was only going to get worse if I didn't get out. The breaking point came about 8 months after I moved into the apartment over the garage, on a Thursday evening in late May. Robert knocked on my door around 9 p.m., which had become increasingly common. He'd find reasons to come to my apartment several times a week, always with some excuse about needing to discuss Maya's schedule, or share news about her college acceptances, or ask my opinion on some family decision. But really, he was checking on me, monitoring what I was doing, reminding me of his presence and his access to my space.
I answered the door in sweatpants and a t-shirt, my hair in a messy bun, clearly not prepared for company. Robert looked me up and down in a way that made my skin crawl. "Claire, do you have a few minutes? I need to talk to you about something important." Every fiber of my being wanted to say no, to claim I was tired or busy or sick, to close the door in his face. But he was my employer and my landlord, and I was living in his house and dependent on his salary, so I felt like I couldn't refuse. "Come in," I said reluctantly, leaving the door open and sitting in the chair farthest from the couch where he settled himself. Robert started with small talk, asking about my day, commenting on the weather, mentioning something about Maya's upcoming graduation. Then he shifted to what he really wanted to discuss. "Claire, you've been with us for almost a year now. This arrangement has worked out even better than I hoped. Maya's going to Yale in the fall, which is largely thanks to your support and guidance, and having you here has been good for me too. The house feels alive again. I feel less lonely. You've become such an important part of our family." I braced myself, sensing where this was headed. "I'm glad I could help Maya get into a great school. That's what you hired me for." Robert leaned forward, his expression intense. "But I hired you for more than just academics, Claire. I hired you to be part of our family, and I think it's time we formalize that relationship even more." He pulled out a small jewelry box, and my heart started pounding with dread. This belonged to my wife. It's a necklace she loved, a family heirloom actually, passed down from her grandmother. I think she'd want you to have it. I want you to have it. I physically recoiled, pressing back into my chair. "Robert, no, I can't accept that. That belonged to your wife. That should go to Maya someday. It's a family heirloom. I'm not family." He looked annoyed, the mask of friendly concern slipping for just a moment to reveal something harder underneath. "Why do you keep insisting on these artificial boundaries? You live in my house. You eat meals with us every day. You're involved in every aspect of our lives. You are family, Claire. Or you could be if you'd stop fighting it." "Robert," I said, my voice shaking slightly, "we need to talk about boundaries. This has gone too far. I'm Maya's tutor and your employee. That's all this is. That's all it can ever be. I need to establish clearer professional boundaries going forward." His expression went completely cold, all pretense of warmth disappearing. "Professional boundaries? After everything I've done for you? I gave you a job when you were barely making ends meet. I paid off your car when you couldn't afford to fix it. I gave you a place to live that's 10 times nicer than that dump you were sharing with roommates. I pay you a salary that's way above market rate for tutoring.
I've treated you like family, included you in everything, made you part of our lives, and you want to talk about professional boundaries?" I stood up, moving toward the door, needing to create physical distance. "I appreciate everything you've done, but I think I need to start looking for a different position. This situation isn't healthy for me, or for Maya, or for anyone." The words came out more firmly than I expected, and saying them out loud made them feel real and possible. "You're not leaving," Robert said flatly, standing up as well. "You signed a contract. A 1-year contract. You have 4 months left on that agreement. And where would you even go, Claire? You quit all your other tutoring jobs. You gave up your apartment. You have no savings because you've been paying off your student loans with the generous salary I've been paying you. You're completely dependent on this position. You can't afford to leave." The truth of his words was like a punch to the gut. He was right. I had let myself become completely financially dependent on him, had put all my eggs in his basket, had eliminated all my backup options and safety nets. I was trapped, and he knew it. And worse, he deliberately created that trap over months of calculated moves. "I'll figure something out," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "I have friends and family who will help me. I can find other tutoring work. I can make this work." Robert moved closer, close enough that I had to resist the urge to back away, to show fear. "You could do all that," he said quietly, "or you could stay here, where you're valued and compensated well and part of a family that needs you. Think about Maya. She's about to leave for college. This is a difficult transition for her. She needs you here for support during these last few months before she goes. Are you really going to abandon her when she needs you most? Using Maya against me again, weaponizing my care for her, making me feel guilty for prioritizing my own well-being. It was manipulation, and I could see it clearly now, but that didn't make it any less effective at making me feel terrible. I need you to leave now, I said, moving to hold the door open. This conversation is over. Robert stared at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled, but it was cold and calculating. Think about what I said, Claire. Think about what you'd be giving up. We'll talk more tomorrow. After he left, I locked the door and sat on my bed, shaking. That was the moment I knew with absolute certainty that I had to get out, had to escape the situation before it escalated further, had to prioritize my safety and sanity over the money and the guilt and the complicated feelings I had about abandoning Maya. Over the next 3 weeks, I planned my escape in secret, carefully and methodically, like a prisoner planning a jailbreak. I reached out to the tutoring agency I'd originally worked for, explained I was looking to come back, asked if they had positions available. The coordinator was sympathetic and professional, said they'd always have work for qualified tutors, especially in summer when students needed extra help preparing for standardized tests. I started applying for other jobs too, teaching positions, tutoring centers, anything that would give me income independent of Robert Mitchell. I opened a new bank account at a different bank, one Robert didn't know about. I started redirecting a small portion of each paycheck into that account, building up a small emergency fund that he couldn't access or monitor. It wasn't much, maybe $50 or $100 per check, not enough that he'd notice the difference, but enough that over a few weeks I had nearly $1,000 saved. I looked at apartments I could afford, even though they were all significantly worse than where I was currently living. Studio apartments in not great neighborhoods, rooms in shared houses with multiple roommates, basement units with tiny windows and questionable heating. But they represented freedom and autonomy and escape, so I filled out applications and put down deposits where I could.
I documented every inappropriate comment, every boundary violation, every instance of Robert using his financial power over me to control my behavior. I kept notes on my phone with dates and times and exact quotes as best as I could remember them. I saved text messages that showed his increasing possessiveness and anger when I tried to establish boundaries. I took photos of the expensive gifts he'd given me that I'd tried to refuse. I was building evidence, though I wasn't entirely sure what I'd use it for, just knowing instinctively that documentation might protect me later. I told my parents the full truth about what was happening, not the sanitized version I'd been feeding them for months, but the reality of how uncomfortable and controlled and trapped I felt. My mom cried, my dad got angry. They both immediately offered to let me move back home temporarily, said I could live in my childhood bedroom rent-free for as long as I needed while I got back on my feet. The shame of being 24 and needing to move home was significant, but the relief of having that option was even bigger. I confided in Maya, which felt risky but necessary. We were sitting in her room one afternoon while she was supposed to be working on final papers for school, but instead we were just talking, and I made the decision to be honest with her. Maya, I need to tell you something. I'm going to be leaving at the end of the month. This situation with your dad has become really uncomfortable for me, and I need to get out. Her face went through several expressions, surprise and dismay, and then understanding and even relief. I know, she said quietly. I see how he is with you, the way he looks at you, the way he talks about you when you're not here, the way he's been trying to keep you close. It reminds me of how he was with my mom before she got sick, this intensity and possessiveness and need to control everything. I've felt guilty about it, like I'm the reason you're trapped here, like he's using me to manipulate you. You're not the reason I'm trapped, I assured her. Your dad created this situation deliberately, but I do need to get out, and I'm worried about leaving you here with him. She nodded. I'll be okay. I'm leaving for college in 3 months anyway. And honestly, Claire, watching you plan to leave is teaching me that it's possible, that you can walk away from situations that aren't healthy, even when someone is controlling you financially. I think I needed to see that, needed to know that escape is possible. When I finally gave Robert my notice 2 weeks before the end of my contract, I did it formally and in writing, leaving a resignation letter on the kitchen table early one morning before he was awake. The letter was brief and professional, stating that I was resigning from my position effective in 2 weeks, thanking him for the opportunity, wishing Maya well in college. I didn't explain my reasons or justify my decision or apologize. I just stated the facts. Robert's reaction was immediate and explosive. He called me before 7 a.m., his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "You can't just quit, Claire. We have a contract. You committed to a year, and you have 2 months left on that contract. If you leave now, I'll sue you for breach of contract. I've consulted with my lawyer, and we have grounds." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Sue me if you want to, Robert. But I should tell you that I've been documenting every inappropriate comment you've made, every boundary you've violated, every instance of you using your financial power to control me. I have text messages and voice memos and detailed notes with dates and times. If you want to take this to court, I have evidence that will make you look very bad, both professionally and personally." It was a calculated bluff. I did have documentation, but I had no idea if it would actually hold up in court or protect me legally. But Robert didn't know that, and he was a lawyer who understood how damaging even allegations could be to his professional reputation. The line was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was icy.
"After everything I did for you, everything I gave you, and this is how you repay me? By threatening me and abandoning my daughter right before she leaves for college." "I'm not abandoning Maya," I said. "I'll still be available to help her if she needs it over the summer, but I'm done living in your house and being under your control. The 2 weeks notice I gave was generous considering the circumstances. You have until the end of the month to find a replacement tutor." Robert hung up without another word. The next 2 weeks were tense and uncomfortable. Robert refused to speak to me directly, communicating only through curt text messages about logistics. He was home as little as possible, avoiding me, radiating cold anger whenever we were in the same space. He docked my final paycheck, claiming various expenses and damages that I was supposedly responsible for, leaving me with barely a third of what I should have earned. He kept all the furniture he'd bought for the apartment, claiming it was his property and I had no right to it. He refused to provide a reference for future employment, which I'd expected but which still hurt my job prospects. Maya helped me pack my belongings on my last day. We loaded everything into my car, which suddenly seemed very small compared to the apartment I was leaving. She hugged me tight before I left. "Thank you for everything, Claire. Not just the tutoring, but for showing me that you can leave when someone is controlling you. I'll remember that when I leave for college in 3 months. I promise I'll remember that." I drove away from the Mitchell house for the last time feeling a mix of emotions: relief at being out, guilt about leaving Maya, shame about how I'd let the situation develop, fear about my uncertain financial future, anger at Robert for his manipulation, pride in myself for finally having the courage to leave. I moved back in with my parents, which was humbling and difficult, but also safe and supportive. My mom had made up my old bedroom, and sitting in that space where I'd spent my teenage years felt like regression and progress simultaneously. I was starting over, but I was starting over with clear eyes about boundaries and manipulation and control. I picked up substitute teaching work for the last few weeks of the school year and through summer school, making much less than I'd made working for Robert, but also working in an environment with clear professional boundaries and institutional oversight. I rebuilt my tutoring client base through the agency, working with multiple families instead of becoming dependent on any single client. I went to therapy twice a week for the first 2 months, working through what had happened, processing the manipulation and control, learning to recognize red flags earlier, rebuilding my sense of professional identity and personal boundaries. My therapist helped me understand that what I'd experienced had clear parallels to domestic abuse, even though I wasn't in a romantic relationship with Robert.
The same tactics of isolation, financial control, emotional manipulation, gradual boundary erosion, these are tools abusers use regardless of the specific relationship structure. She helped me see that Robert had been grooming me, a term I'd only associated with sexual predators before, but which applies more broadly to anyone who deliberately creates dependency and control. The job offer that seemed too good to refuse, the gradual isolation from other clients in my support system, the financial dependence created through loans and then employment, the erosion of professional boundaries until I was living in his house and involved in every aspect of his family life, the use of Maya to create emotional obligation and guilt. None of this was accidental or innocent. It was systematic manipulation designed to trap me. Understanding this helped me let go of some of the shame and self-blame. I hadn't been stupid or naive or reckless. I'd been targeted by someone who was skilled at manipulation, someone who saw my financial vulnerability and my caring nature and my youth and inexperience and exploited all of it. That wasn't my fault. The manipulation was his choice, his responsibility, his moral failing, not mine. I stayed in touch with Maya through her senior year. We'd meet for coffee occasionally, always somewhere Robert wouldn't know about. She told me he'd hired another tutor after I left, a middle-aged woman this time, probably learning his lesson about young female tutors. Maya counting down the days until college. When she finally left for Stanford in the fall, she called me crying with relief. "I made it, Claire. I'm out. I'm free." We both made it out. Now, 2 years later, I work as a math teacher at a public high school. The pay isn't as good as what Robert was paying me, but it's steady and legitimate, and I have clear professional boundaries. I have colleagues and a union and support systems. No one can isolate me or control me or use financial power to manipulate my decisions. Maya is thriving at college across the country. She's in therapy dealing with the emotional abuse she experienced growing up.
She's gained healthy weight back, she's sleeping better, she's choosing her own major and activities based on what she actually wants rather than what her father demands. She calls me sometimes, and we talk about her life and her healing, and I'm so proud of how far she's come. I don't know what happened to Robert. I heard through mutual contacts that he eventually remarried, some woman closer to his age who I hope is better equipped to handle his controlling tendencies than I was. Or maybe she's another victim. I'll probably never know. What I do know is that I learned some hard lessons from that experience. I learned that predatory people don't always look predatory. Robert Mitchell was successful, respected, seemed like a devoted father and a generous employer. But underneath that surface, he was manipulative and controlling, and willing to exploit a young woman's financial vulnerability and emotional care for his daughter to serve his own needs. I learned that professional boundaries exist for good reasons. When those boundaries get blurred, when the relationship between employer and employee or tutor and family becomes too personal, it creates opportunities for exploitation. I should have insisted on maintaining those boundaries from the start, should have refused to stay for dinners and personal conversations, should have worked through the agency instead of going independent with Robert as my only client. I learned that financial dependence is a trap. When one person controls your income, your housing, your financial stability, they have enormous power over you. I should have maintained multiple income streams, should have kept my own separate housing, should have built up savings before making myself completely dependent on one source of income. I learned to trust my instincts. From that very first visit, I felt uncomfortable around Robert, but I ignored those feelings because I needed the money, because I wanted to help Maya, because everyone else told me it was a great opportunity. My gut was right. When something feels wrong, when someone makes you uncomfortable, when a situation seems too good to be true, there's usually a reason. Listen to those instincts. Most importantly, I learned that caring about someone, in this case Maya, can be weaponized against you. Robert knew I genuinely cared about his daughter and wanted to help her succeed. He used that care to keep me in an increasingly uncomfortable situation, guilting me with implications that leaving would hurt Maya, that I'd be abandoning her when she needed me. But the truth is that staying in that unhealthy situation wasn't actually helping Maya. The best thing I could have done for her was to show her that you can and should leave situations where you're being manipulated and controlled.
My leaving probably helped her recognize that leaving her father's control was possible too. If you're in a situation like I was, where professional boundaries are being violated, where someone is using financial power to control you, where you feel trapped and uncomfortable but can't quite articulate why, please trust those feelings. Make a plan, save money secretly if you have to, reach out to friends and family for support, document inappropriate behavior, contact professional organizations or lawyers if necessary. Don't wait as long as I did. Don't let the situation get as bad as mine got. And if you're a young professional, especially a young woman working in someone's home, please protect yourself. Maintain clear boundaries. Keep multiple clients. Don't become financially dependent on one employer. Trust your instincts about inappropriate behavior. Have people you can call if you feel unsafe. Remember that a good employer will respect your boundaries and won't make you feel uncomfortable. These days, when I tell people about my experience as a tutor for the Mitchell family, they're often shocked. He seemed so nice, they say. He was just lonely and trying to help you. You're overreacting. But the people who understand manipulation and control, they recognize the patterns immediately.
They see how Robert systematically isolated me, created financial dependence, violated boundaries, and used his daughter to maintain emotional control over me. They understand that what happened to me was a form of abuse, even though it looked from the outside like a generous employer and a convenient living arrangement. That's the thing about manipulative people. They're good at hiding what they're doing. They're good at making it look like generosity or care or concern, when really it's about control. They're good at making the victim question their own perceptions and feelings. They're good at isolating you from people who might help you see what's really happening. But I see it clearly now. Robert Mitchell didn't hire me because Maya needed a calculus tutor. He hired me because he wanted someone he could control, someone young and financially vulnerable and caring enough to be manipulated through his daughter. The calculus tutoring was just the excuse to get me into his house and into his life. When he said, "You're not just taking care of Maya's education anymore, you're taking care of both of us now," he was telling me exactly what his intentions were. I just didn't have the experience or framework to recognize it at the time. I'm sharing this story because I know I'm not the only young woman who's been in a situation like this. Babysitters, nannies, tutors, personal assistants, home health aides. We're all vulnerable to this kind of manipulation because our work involves being in someone's private space, often developing personal relationships with families, sometimes living in their homes. The normal boundaries that exist in traditional workplaces don't automatically exist in these situations, and predatory people know that and exploit it. If my story sounds familiar to you, if you recognize these patterns in your own situation, please know it's not your fault and you can get out. Make a plan, protect yourself financially, reach out for help, document what's happening, trust your instincts. You deserve to work in an environment where you feel safe and respected, where professional boundaries are maintained, where your employer doesn't use financial or emotional manipulation to control you. Maya messages me occasionally with updates on her life. She's doing well, really well, building a life for herself that's nothing like the controlled existence she had with her father. She's in therapy, working through the emotional abuse she experienced. She set firm boundaries with Robert, limited contact, refusing to let him control her decisions anymore. She thanks me sometimes for showing her that it was possible to leave, that you don't have to stay in situations where someone is controlling you just because they're family, or they helped you, or you feel obligated. Last month, she sent me a photo of herself at a beach, smiling genuinely, looking healthy and happy and free. The caption said, "Thank you for teaching me more than calculus. Thank you for teaching me that I deserve to take up space and make my own choices and live life on my own terms." That photo is on my refrigerator now, a reminder that even though the situation with Robert was traumatic and difficult, some good came from it. Maya got out. I got out.
We both learned that freedom and autonomy and self-determination are worth fighting for, even when it's hard, even when it's scary, even when it means walking away from money or security or situations that look good on the surface. These days, I have clear boundaries with my students and their families. I don't stay for personal dinners. I don't accept gifts beyond standard teacher appreciation items. I don't share details about my personal life or finances. I don't work such long hours that I'm isolated from my other relationships and support systems. I maintain multiple income streams so I'm never dependent on one employer, and when parents try to cross boundaries, I shut it down immediately and professionally. Some people might think I'm being cold or overly cautious, but I learned the hard way that boundaries protect everyone.
They protect me from exploitation, and they protect families from inappropriate relationships developing. Good boundaries make for healthy professional relationships. The absence of boundaries creates opportunities for manipulation and abuse. So yeah, that's my story. The story of how I went from being a simple math tutor to being trapped in a manipulative situation with a controlling man who used his daughter and his money to try to bind me to his family in ways that had nothing to do with education. The story of how I escaped and rebuilt my life and my career. The story of how both Maya and I learned that you can leave. You should leave. You must leave when someone is controlling you. I hope sharing this helps someone recognize a similar situation in their own life. I hope it helps someone leave before it gets as bad as mine got. I hope it helps someone understand that the discomfort they're feeling is real and valid and worth paying attention to. Most of all, I hope it helps someone remember that you don't owe anyone your freedom, your autonomy, or your self-determination, no matter how much they've helped you or how much you care about their family or how convenient the arrangement seems on paper. You deserve to work and live in environments where you feel safe and respected and where your boundaries are honored. If you found this story meaningful, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Where are you listening from? Have you been in a similar situation with a job that crossed professional boundaries? How did you recognize what was happening, and how did you get out? Your story might help someone else who's struggling to see their situation clearly. If this story helped you or made you think differently about professional boundaries and manipulation, please consider supporting the channel so I can continue sharing these important stories. Thank you so much for listening. I look forward to reading your experiences and thoughts in the comments. You can find more stories about workplace boundaries, manipulation, and personal growth on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a new story. See you in the next one!